If you watched all these videos, you know my first day on the PCT was not in March. I hiked through Desolation Wilderness a couple of times, hiked the first mile, touched the PCT on the High Sierra Trail, and in fact I hiked a full section in 2020. My son's Boy Scout troop was supposed to hike Philmont in 2018, but it was canceled due to the epic New Mexico fires that year. So we were supposed to go again in 2020, but of course that got hit by the pandemic. I will eventually make a video about the 2021 Philmont trek, but until then, you can watch this video I made that just enumerates all the activities at Philmont, the largest scout ranch in the world. Instead of wasting yet another opportunity to complete a 50-miler, I came up with a plan to hike the Marble Mountains along the PCT with the troop. The crew took 2 vehicles to the trailhead at Etna Summit. I drove my Traverse, and Adam from the Section 12 video took his minivan. There were 6 boys on our crew: Trevor, Avery, Leon, my sons, Riley and Dawson, and my nephew, Connor. One of the reasons I didn't make a video back in 2020 was because the scouts were all minors. They're all adults now. The adult leaders were Michael, Leon's dad, Adam, Avery's father, and me, of course. We met at our troop's HQ at 6 a.m., and after the standard waiting for people, gear, and people shuffling, we were off for our 5.5-hour drive. We stopped at Fort Jones to fuel up, and the boys bought sandwiches for lunch. We arrived at the Etna Summit around noon. This is where Nate and I came off the trail in the last video. Everyone had already eaten, so we just needed to distribute the meal bags. There was a food bag that was suitable for hanging, designated for every meal. There were 12 bags that would cover us from day 1 dinner to day 5 lunch. My older son Riley planned all the meals, taking into account calories, weight, and cost. At about $50 per person, he did a great job, especially considering we were expecting 2 more scouts that canceled last minute. Everybody had gotten 1 or 2 bags, but I was assigned 3 for some reason. We had big jugs of water and spare fuel canisters in the car, so everybody was topped off before hitting the trail. We were on the trail by 1 p.m. The first day was just 7 miles, but a tough one considering our late start and the fact that the boys had been cooped up for months due to the COVID lockdowns. We rolled into the campsite at Cub Springs during the waning minutes of dusk. We would hike through the damage caused by 2017's Salmon August complex fire on and off all the way to Seiad Valley. But we'd only camp on charred ground that first night, and of course our clothes and gear would be filthy the rest of the trip. Our trek leader, Avery, split up the tasks. Half the boys would put up their tents, the other half collected water and cooked. After dinner, a detail was assigned to clean up, and then the bags had to be hung. Hanging the food bags was tough because it was dark and all the trees were burned. A line was hung between 2 large carcasses, and then all the bags were hoisted up across that line. Eyeing the bags in the morning, it was not a pretty hang because the weight of 11 bags really taxed the primary line. Day 2 was probably the easiest day. Just 7 miles again, but we had all day to do them. We stopped at Shelley Meadows for lunch. Cows wandered the meadows, and some of them had bells. The stream that meanders through the meadow was loaded with salamanders, or were they newts? I don't know. You tell me. A little while later, we came to a ridge that had an incredible view that included Mount Shasta. Normally the boys say that's nice and lose interest, but for some reason they wanted to stop for a good long break to enjoy the vista. Then I discovered the reason. They got cell reception. Around 3, we stopped at a Traverse for a break and a snack. While grabbing his snack, Avery accidentally let his sleeping bag roll down the hill. The grade became crazy steep just a little ways down the hill, so the boys had to give up on retrieving it. Practicing tying bowlines finally paid off. I lowered myself down the hill while anchored to a tree. Doing this, I was able to safely retrieve the bag from the base of yet another tree. We camped at Fisher Lake. The boys were able to swim and fish. The bear hang was a lot easier. For dinner, the boys were introduced to the majesty that is North Sides. Waking up to a view of the lake was epic. We upped the mileage the 3rd day, just about 10 miles. Man-Eaten Lake was quite a sight. Throughout the day, I heard some grumblings from Avery. He was having a lot of pain caused by his pack. Also, he wasn't sleeping well. The pandemic lockdown meant the boys weren't getting any exercise and their sleep schedules were all messed up. Every day was like the last, daytime, nighttime, what's the difference? We got to Marble Valley Camp around 5. I hiked to the spot to recon Marble Mountains the April before. That year, we had a massive snow dump in March. If you recall, that's the storm that had contributed to Trevor Microsoft Layer's death in San Jacinto. 3 months really made a difference. The window to the unoccupied ranger cabin was unlatched. The next morning was not a good one. The combination of lack of sleep and back pain had gotten to Avery. He was not getting out of his sleeping bag. In the end, his father decided the 2 of them would stay at the ranger cabin until Avery felt up to it, and then they'd hike the 4 miles down the mountain to a planned bailout spot. The plan was always for my father to meet us at a campground near Seiad Valley at the end of the 5th day. That's right, my dad has been a trail angel since 2020. He knew about the possible bailout spots at Lover's Camp. I just needed to get a hold of him with my inReach. Throughout the course of the day, I followed the meetup progress. By the end of the day, my dad had picked them up, delivered them to Adam's van back at Etna Summit. Thanks to his night owl habits, Avery was able to help his dad with the long drive home. But that wasn't the end of the drama. My sons were assigned breakfast cooking duties. As was often the case, they were butting heads over the various tasks involved. In the end, I had to separate them. One could cook better than the two of them together. And I ended up helping out a little. I say this to set the stage. Everyone was on edge, including me. I could have handled my boys' dust up better. When breakfast, cleanup, and packing was done, it was pretty late, and we had 11 miles to go. Trevor became our new trek leader. With his incredible attitude, the transition of power was seamless. During the day, I encouraged the boys to come up with trail names. Trevor was often referred to as T-Fong already, so that was easy. Dawson became Dawsome because he's awesome. Connor became Konar the Barbarian. Leon refused any trail name offered, which is of course his prerogative. I wish I could remember Riley's trail name, but it had something to do with a song he kept singing. The midday break was at Paradise Lake. Great views and the water was warm but shallow. As we left the lake, we briefly passed through an area that reminded me of pictures of the Scottish Highlands. But that ended and we entered a dry section. It was still beautiful. The plan was to camp at Buckhorn Spring. It had 2 tent sites and a small, slow spring a little off trail. I got there first and discovered a tent was already set up and a couple inside for the night at 3 p.m. I told them our situation, that we'd be happy to squeeze our 4 tents into the second site, but they weren't having it. I discussed it with Michael. We didn't really need their permission, but it would be bad form for us to stay with 5 loud teenagers without their consent. In the end, we decided to camel up at Buckhorn and then dry camp at the next site, which was about a half a mile away. Future me would dry camp on the PCT much more often than I would camp near a water source, but dry camping the Boy Scout way is tough. Boys would be expected to do the dishes after both dinner and breakfast and still have sufficient water in their bottles when they start the next day's hike. Fill up at Buckhorn Spring was time consuming. It was just a puddle that poured down a hill and quickly disappeared into the grass.
We got into camp late and did all our chores. You're welcome.
The next water source, which was unreliable, was 2 miles further. For safety's sake, I hiked it to confirm it was still running. If it wasn't, we'd pack up before breakfast and eat at the next real water source. So I got an extra 4 miles that day, but it was nice. After the tense morning, it was good to have some me time on the dark trail. In just 3 years, I'd hiked the trail alone a lot. We were harassed by deer all night. Every chance I could, I would try to gross out the boys. So I told them how the deer were there to lick the sweat off their gear and the pee off the bushes. I don't know if they believed me, but it was true. This day would be our longest 15 miles. It was nearly all downhill, and because we were going downhill, we'd be entering the lowest elevation and therefore the hottest terrain. The boys were over it. Leon would stick with his father, but the rest of the boys wanted to go fast, rest, and repeat. Michael had a GPS tracker on him, so I put mine on Konar the Barbarian. So the 4 of them leaped ahead of us for most of the day. We ran into a stretch where the new growth returned after the fire with a vengeance. All you could do was just push your way through. The blowdowns were bad too. We lost the trail at one point because the switchback was completely covered with a pile of them. Our last meal was eaten at a creek crossing. The afternoon was spent following Gritter Creek for 8 miles. They were easy miles, but the day was getting long. With about 5 miles to go, we came to a bridge that the vanguard had agreed to meet the rest of us at. The water under the bridge was awesome. We took a long break. At first, people just put their feet in, but pretty soon, everyone was swimming. We ran into a trail crew. They said they'd be dealing with the blowdowns and the overgrowth the next day. They also pointed out the poison oak that was everywhere. I wear pants, so I don't think about it, but the boys were all in shorts. I hustled up to the lead boys, which was no small feat, and their legs got a good washing. I wasn't concerned about Michael and Leon because they wear pants too. A little further down the trail at a creek crossing, the boys spotted a bear running away from them. As the conquering heroes walked into camp, Konar's sister Addie was there to greet them, and the cousin's grandmother was cooking up hot dogs. My dad showed up later after he was done with an errand. We stuffed ourselves with hot dogs, baked beans, and pie. In the background, you can see my Traverse. My dad and mother had picked it up after dropping Adam off so we could go straight home after finishing our hike the next day. Before leaving, my dad left us an ice chest full of orange juice, fruit, and danishes for breakfast, so the boys wouldn't even have to cook in the morning. So far, we had hiked 49.5 miles. We just have to hike to the road to finish our 50-miler, but I had been talking up the Seiad Valley Cafe, where they sell famous giant stacks of pancakes. The plan was always to hike all the way to the cafe. We told the boys Michael would meet us at the cafe in the Traverse. I hiked the rest of the way with the boys. Unfortunately, due to the pandemic, the cafe was closed. After we dropped Konar with Addie and his grandparents, the rest of us got in and out in Redding. Good thing I didn't see any snakes. It would have really screwed up my count. Would it be snake 0, 1, or 9? Trail stop checklist. Seiad Valley. Check.